Bienvenidos! In today's video, we're going to talk about reflexive verbs, but a special type. For now, we'll call them other reflexive verbs. So let's recap what is a reflexive verb. So remember, reflexive verbs are easily identified as infinitives because they have se on the end of them. So it's not just levantar, it's levantarse. So what does that mean typically? What have you seen in the past? Well, typically, these reflexive verbs reflect that the subject is the same as the object in the sentence. In other words, whoever's doing the action is doing the action to themselves. For example, in this case, levantarse is to stand up. So levantar is usually to lift. So in essence, this person's lifting themselves up versus lifting something else up. So for example, if I say I lift myself up out of bed, that's reflexive. I'm doing the action and the action is being done to myself. Reflexive. But if I say I lift the book, that's not reflexive because I'm lifting a separate object. So just as a recap, to reflect that the subject and the object are the same, we include these special pronouns, these reflexive pronouns. So me levanto is I lift myself up. Te levantas is you lift yourself up. Se levanta is he or she or you formal, lift yourself up. Nos levantamos, we lift ourselves up. Os levantáis, y'all lift yourselves up. In España, se levantan, they lift themselves up. Now, in this example, I use the present tense, but it's important to remember that you can use any tense, so these verb endings could change. You could use the preterite, for example. And when we use reflexive verbs, the pronouns, so these items in blue, have to match the conjugation. So basically what that means is they have to come from the same box to be considered reflexive. I can't use a yo form ending with se, for example. They come from different boxes, they don't match. So that's just a quick recap on what you probably have learned in the past about reflexive verbs. Now these other reflexive verbs, so the special ones we're going to talk about in this video today, they conjugate the same way as the verbs you just saw. So that means they must include the me, te, se, nos, os, se pronouns as well. And again, the endings of the verb, the conjugations, match the pronouns. So if you're using a yo form ending, you must use me for your reflexive pronoun. What's unique about these, however, is it no longer expresses in this scenario that the subject and the object are the same. These verbs are reflexive, they end in se, but instead they describe a change in mental, emotional, or physical state. So in English, think of it as gets or becomes in a lot of situations. So here are some examples of these other reflexive verbs. So we have aburrirse, to get bored, casarse, to get married, divertirse, to have fun, dormirse, to fall asleep, enojarse, to become angry, ponerse, and then it would be followed by an adjective, to become. So for example, he became happy after he won. You could say, se puso alegre después de ganar. Volverse loco o loca, to go crazy. So these are reflexive verbs as in they end in se, but the reason they're reflexive is because their meaning is slightly different. They express a changed state, if you will. They still conjugate the same way, so if I took aburrirse and put it into the present tense, me aburro, te aburres, se aburre, nos aburrimos, os aburrís, se aburren. All the same conjugations, it's just the meaning of the verb is changed. So now that we've seen these, just be aware that every time you run across a verb that ends in se, it doesn't necessarily mean it's reflexive in regards to the subject and the object are the same, but the meaning of the verb has switched. Here are some quick samples of sentences that use these other reflexive verbs to get the meaning. For example, had fun, got angry, fell asleep, became bored. Try to put these into Spanish using the verbs we just talked about. Watch out for the tenses here. We're using the preterite if you notice past tense. So pause the video, give these a try. Let's see how you do. Alright, let's see how these went. I had fun yesterday at the game. Me divertí ayer en el partido. You got angry when you lost. Te enojaste cuando perdiste. He fell asleep in the afternoon. Él se durmió por la tarde. Now, notice that durmió is one of those skate verbs you might have seen in our previous videos on IR stem change verbs in the preterite. Remember that any changes that happen in the normal verb, dormir, would happen depending on what tense you're using with the reflexive. We got bored during the game. Nos aburrimos durante el partido. Nos aburrimos, reflecting that we became bored during the game. And that's it, short and sweet. Other reflexive verbs. So keep in mind that reflexive verbs don't just reflect that the subject and the object are the same, but they can just be special verbs, unique verbs, that reflect a change in mental, emotional, or physical states. So think of it like gets or becomes in English. That's what the pronoun reflects for us for these special reflexive verbs. Gracias, buena suerte, nos vemos!